Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. This morning I will show you 3 projects. Basically, I would like to address them as 3 different strategic approaches vis-à-vis heritage. And primarily, of course, we are, as an office, known for large public buildings. I will show you 3 public buildings which have a very strong relation with repurposing old buildings. They're not necessarily very old buildings. One of the buildings is from the 19th. Another building is from the end of the 19th century. And the third one is from the beginning of the 20th century. So the title is, of course, The Future of the Past, which was a title way back of one of the biennales in Venice, which is still a kind of very inspiring title, is that by rethinking what our heritage is all about, it also might carry a significance, both in a cultural sense and in a technical sense, in order to accommodate public needs and public services. Like I said, the 3 buildings I'm going to talk about is, the first building is the Naturalis building in Leiden, which is primarily a very large archive of all biodiversity artifacts in the country. The second building is a competition we've won in Nantes, and we repurposed there a very old concrete structure designed by the engineer François Hennebique. And the third is the Gare Maritime. We are children from the 60s and 70s of the last century. And for us as an office, one of the primary drivers in our design thinking is the way you relate to resources, and in particular to energy. I was almost 10 in 1972, and our part of Europe was confronted with a severe oil crisis due to war in the Middle East, and nothing new for that matter. And from that moment onward, in particular in the 70s, also related to the report of the Club of Rome, thinking about sustainability was, I would say, one of the primary driving forces in the design work of our office. We designed in the early 90s a building where all rainwater was collected and formed a pool in the heart of the building. I'm not going to show you that. But for us, repurposing buildings, but also think about what the performance is of a building in relation to the climate crisis, for instance, or in that matter, the energy crisis, is a driving factor in our thinking. Because I think what is key if you're thinking about the development of the public domain, and if you think about development of public works like public buildings, I think we should be aware of the fact that with our interventions, we change the earth. And of course, that sounds super pretentious, but taking into account that we were with 8 billion people on the earth, if everybody does change 8 billion times something small in the world, we might be heading for a better world. Naturalis, it's a building that is all about that. It is the National Biodiversity Institute of the Netherlands. It has a collection which contains more than 42 million biodiversity artifacts. So they collect bacteria, they collect viruses, but they also have skeletons of dinosaurs and everything which is in between. And the institute came into being due to a budget cut. So formerly there were 5 different institutes, all related to national universities. And on a certain moment they discovered the fact that having all these separate collections was not viable anymore in economic terms, and then the central government decided to relocate all this collection to one central location in a city called Leiden. And at that place, there was already a biodiversity or natural history institute existing. And it was an existing building. And the existing building had a tower, and the existing building had large exhibition halls. And the question was during the competition what to do with the existing building and what to do with all the new functions that had to be added. And we came up with the idea that we should keep the existing building and that we completely repurposed the existing building, and we took the former exhibition halls and we transformed the former exhibition halls in depot spaces. And then we made a new building next to it, carrying all future exhibition halls and all future amenities, like a restaurant, like an auditorium spaces, and other public facilities. So primarily the reason why we won this competition was the fact that we kept the building. And we kept the building because of all the embodied CO2, which is embodied in the concrete. So it's a very sustainable measurement to keep a building. We repurposed the building and we changed it from an exhibition building into a depot building. And by doing so, we created this new ensemble. So on a strategic level, in the 3 projects I'm going to show, the trick in this case is just making the difficult new parts next to it and reconsider the existing part and repurpose it in such a way that you can have a viable museum. That's also visible in section, where you have the large exhibition halls on the right-hand side and let's say the lower existing building repurposed with all the depot spaces next to each other. And on floor plan, it's primarily the same. We created in the left part of the building, we created a structure of quadrants that also coincides with the existing load-bearing structure, but also coincides with the way you have to keep natural history artifacts. So you always have the danger of contamination, you have the danger of parasites in the collection. So the quadrants also helped us to have a very well compartmentalized building where all the depot spaces could be separated in a very functional manner. And then again on the right-hand side you have very large exhibition spaces stacked upon each other that you can see here. So we created a section where you have large halls where a dinosaur can stand, and you have smaller halls where you can see the bacteria or whatever you can come up with other large natural history artifacts. So the building also performs as a laboratory space, and what is interesting, and which also of course relates to the possible future development you can envision here in Žižkov, is the fact that you should always try to envision what kind of spaces do need very special purposes and what kind of spaces can be as generic and as I would call have a general kind of organization that could be accommodated, for instance, in a space like this. And due to the generous size of a space like this, of course, you can have an auditorium here, whereas in small and very dedicated spaces, you can collect all the species, as in the case of Naturalis. I will quickly show you the building as such. So the exhibition building carries very strongly on the kind of articulation of the metamorphosis of life. So wherever you look, there's a kind of evocation of natural forms, honeycomb structures, development of bacteria and the way they are represented in the kind of concrete elements that surround the buildings. And eventually, we think that the building offers this kind of very strong analogy and powerful evocation what life on Earth is all about. So this was the first strategy. keep the building and build next to it. The second strategy is a competition we've won in Nantes, and there the strategy is keep the building but build over it. There's a competition we've won recently. It's called the City des Imaginaires. It's the city of imagination, and the building is dedicated to the 200 years anniversary of Jules Verne. And Jules Verne, as you all know, was a kind of this powerful figure in the French cultural life, evoking all kinds of images of what the future is all about. And the city of Nantes had the idea to have this city imaginaire built in a very old harbor structure. The old harbor structure is a former warehouse, and it's the mill of Nantes. And so you know, if you do not know France, I will explain you a little bit of France. You have the river Loire, and the Loire River ends up in the ocean at Nantes. And along the Loire, of course, you have all the beautiful wineries, and you have all kinds of agricultural production. And all this agricultural production was eventually collected and packed and treated and shipped over the world from this building. So it was in fact property of a society of farmer companies who managed that building. The building was next to a large stone quarry. So the building was, if you come from the city, the building was in a cliff, because as you would see, the edge of the stone quarry is here, and then you had the stone quarry, and then you had this building as a kind of giant monument next to the quarry along the river. In the 70s, they stopped using it as a kind of collection of agricultural products, and they changed it into a very mundane office building. And it was quite a difficult office building, because due to the deep floor plans, you had quite a difficult office building, but they already repurposed the building in the 70s. So how would you then use and reinterpret a building which is on the first hand next to this quarry, and they are changing the quarry into a kind of beautiful park. On the other hand, it's this kind of industrial monument on the river, and next to that, it's a very visible building if you come from the inner city of Nantes towards the, let's say, the suburb of Nantes in the direction of the Atlantic coast. So we perceived the building as a kind of, oh, I can't go back, sorry, I'm going, oh, yeah. So we perceived this building as a kind of means to connect three things. First of all, we had the idea that we should have the park prolonging towards the border of the river. And so until now, the border of the river is occupied by industrial activities. Secondly, we had the idea that the building should relate to the high park which exists on the edge of the cliff. And thirdly, we concluded that we should only keep the parts of the building that are still in a good shape. Because in the 70s, like I showed you, they really started demolishing the building, and they treated the building in a very nasty way. They covered old Hennebeek structure with fresh concrete and other kind of 70s technical purposes. So we decided to propose to demolish everything which was in a bad shape or which was severely affected in the 70s. So the proposal is now to create this kind of large inner garden. The inner garden shows the Hennebeek structure. François Hennebeek was a French engineer who invented a special way of making prefabricated concrete. and we take away all the 70s screed and floor slabs that are cast upon it, and we built with a kind of bridge structure, we built the new museum next to it and over it. And primarily, of course, you have a kind of public pathway from the park, surrounding park, through the covered park, and you go up to a new future roof park, which is next to all kinds of public amenities, in this case, a library, ateliers, auditorium and screening rooms, and then eventually next to that you have the museum and the Jules Verne Museum and a kind of large temporary exhibition, and you eventually end on this kind of beautiful roof park on the same level as the roof park, which is on the other side of the quarry, overlooking the river. Next to that, we think, and we will develop a kind of means where the interior of the covered garden and the interior of the staircase I just showed, so this kind of large inner space, will also be used as a kind of natural lung, producing fresh air, producing a permanent draft, and by doing so also aiming to make a building without technical services, or as little as possible, because one of the most polluting things in our profession are technical services. So the good thing about this building, why does this building have a future? It's hardly hindered by technical services. Of course, we might have to redo the electricity in the future, but there's not this kind of stupid air handling systems that take 30% of your free clearance. And we are always opposing that and fighting that. And the means here is that we imagine this kind of natural subtraction through natural draft. We can come up with a kind of innovative imagination of what the city of imagination can be all about. And of course, this covered garden will be a public destination, but also will be a kind of showcase of what the industrial heritage of Nantes is all about. So I promised myself to do a 4 hours lectures, and I'm almost on 2/3 of my four hours lecture, so maybe I'll manage to do it within 45 minutes. The last project I'm going to show is a third strategy we often apply in repurposing existing buildings. So we had the first strategy, building next to it, the second strategy, building over it, and the third strategy is building in it. What I'm going to show is the Gare Maritime, and the Gare Maritime is a very large cargo station, freight station in the inner city of Brussels. I won't tell you anything about the history of Belgium, which is important to know, but it's almost too difficult to be explained. One of the things you might have to remember is that in 1902, Congo, which until then was the personal possession of the Belgian king, became part of Belgium, and due to that, Belgium had a period of incredible wealth of all the stolen goods they imported from Congo, basically, and this building was a hinge in that story of colonial exploitation. I'm not going to dwell upon that, but the building is large. It's 300 meters long, 150 meters wide, and it consists of 7 halls, and you always have you have 3 halls where the trains would run, and you always have 2 halls adjacent to that, where you would have a kind of cargo area where all the goods from the trains would be shipped and would be either sent into the city or would be kept into depot. This whole building is on a site which is called the Tour et Taxi site, Turm und Taxis in Germany. The very well-known Habsburg family who had the monopoly on postal services. So the goods would come into the station, and since the station would be a depot border, the border between Belgium and the rest of the world was on the facade where you see the trucks entering or leaving the building. As I said, the building is in a very fragile and vulnerable part of Brussels with a very disputed reputation. And until 20 years ago, the railroad tracks, as you still can see in these slides, were entering into the city there and entering into the buildings. On a certain moment, the whole site was acquired by a group of investors almost 20 years ago. And they made a large urban plan, which is primarily seen here, where they allocated or they negotiated with the Brussels region to allocate 1 million square meters of new program on the full site. And of course, this 1 million square meter comprises housing, comprises offices, but also comprises a function which is called in French équipement public, so public services. And the public services are a mandatory programmatic element. So the region demands from the real estate developers to contribute to the public services. So in all our projects in Brussels, we do have to integrate space for a kindergarten, for elementary school, or in this case of the Gare Maritime, there's an employment center for people from the neighborhood who can refresh their skills, so to speak, to be more agile on the employment market. What I'm going to show you today is a kind of repurposing of the dark gray block on the slide. And here you see an arrow picture. And the reason that we won the competition, so this is the third competition I'm going to show you, is that we decided to push all the new program that had to be allocated in the halls. We pushed that to the 4 side bays. Like I said, you have the 3 high bays and the 4 lower bays. We used the 4 outer bays, and we decided to make new structures in the outer bays in order to keep the full heart of the building free of any programmatic burden. So we told the developer that by keeping the 3 middle bays free from whatever kind of programming, you would have a city where it never rains, and you could have all of a sudden this kind of giant covered square where you can do whatever you want in order to revitalize the neighborhood. And like I said, it's a very fragile and disputed neighborhood, and the city and the developers thought that it was wise to accommodate this giant covered garden in order to kind of also repurpose and recalibrate the nature of the city. So as you see, we have these 5 large pavilions, as we call it. So every pavilion, between bracket, contains more than 5,000 square meters. So we added 50,000 square meters of new floor space within this hall. And we made these kind of back alleys, as we call them, perpendicular to the main space in order to have a very large porosity and to open up the building to the sites surrounding it. So the future neighborhood that will be on the top end of the drawing can in future walk through the building in order to eventually walk into the Brussels inner city. The building was in a very, very, very bad shape since it was out of use since 1992. As you know, in 1992, all European inner borders were lifted due to the Treaty of Maastricht. And then a depot area in the middle of the city didn't make any sense anymore because there was no reason to keep a space to keep goods in a depot entrepot space. From that moment onward, so the building was out of use and it was squatted, it was used for all kinds of activities that were not desired for. We had the idea to repurpose the full building, but also to repurpose the existing wood, to clean the existing wood. If there would have been planks rotten, we just took the plank out and we had a new plank inserted. And we also decided to repurpose all cobblestones that were used for the former quays in the station. Like I said, we added 10 pavilions, between brackets, and they were completely conceived in timber. The reason why they were conceived in timber is that the 7 halls were super fragile and they had a super light foundational structure. So the building or the subsoil could not carry new buildings. So by making timber structure, timber is 5 times lighter than concrete, we were able to add these new pavilions in the building. And simultaneously, of course, the advantage of having a full timber structure is that you can prefabricate everything, and everything was mounted on site directly from the truck and installed in the building. And that offered a very swift and expedient execution process. So the only thing we made in concrete are the elevator pits of the future wooden buildings in the heart of it. Of course, we had to restore the adjacent buildings which were part of the Gare Maritime around it. And next to that, we added a lot of green space in the heart of it, where it never rains, but which also contributes to the quality of the neighborhood, because this neighborhood, besides its poor social condition, it also lacks a lot of green. And then, as you can see here, we used also the alleys, which are perpendicular to the square. We use also as a means to organize our security escape stairs as kind of monumental shapes hovering above you. In the offices and in the spaces, we tried to use the power and the beauty of the former cast iron structure as a means to create a very attractive inner space, and simultaneously, of course, the full timber structure also contributes to a very particular office quality. Like I said, the building is all about this empty space, and the empty space that can be reprogrammed. The beauty, of course, of this building also that it carries an incredible emptiness, and I would argue that the power of a building like this is also the emptiness that can be reprogrammed permanently. So there are this kind of fancy pedal tournaments, there are basketball events for the neighborhood, there are fairs, there are all kinds of activities that we do not even had envisioned in advance, just because of the sheer size of this inner space. And the beauty here, I would argue, that you should not necessarily try to plan everything in advance. Due to the sheer size of this inner space, whatever kind of new activities can come into being, and hopefully they will contribute to the quality of this neighborhood as such, like the Gare Maritime contributed to the quality of this particular part of Brussels. Thank you very much.